to indicate that L is actually the past tense, and then go on in Russian. The past tenses are inflected also for gender, and then indicate the gender. But in a typological exercise, when I send it to grammars, I will expect you to do that. Now, most grammars will have done the job for you. So all you need to do is copy from the grammar. But you need to understand whatever you copy. You need to know your sources. You need to know why this is past tense feminine and not just feminine. And here again, I have to defend me, and this is what I've written. This is, I grew up with Russian in school, so this is past tense for me, but actually the past tense is the end. So this analysis doesn't have to be meticulously correct, but whoever makes it and writes it has to be able to defend it, or redo it so that it becomes consistent. In the Finnish examples, which were given to me, Matti Miestamo did not give me the morphomatic translation. So Amin is given first singular, and then Kirjan is book in genitive, so no morphomatic, no morpheme translations were given here. And then at the end, the case ending was important here, so he separated the case and nothing else. Sometimes this is not going to fly, and people will send you back to the source. Now here, I've given it so that you can see. If you don't understand me, I don't speak Finnish at all. And somebody gave this to me, so I cite it as is, but in a paper, I'm not going to be able to cite this. I have to go back either to the Finnish grammar or to Matti and ask him to do the morphological analysis for me. So glossing means a rough morphological analysis. It is part of your analysis and part of your data. You need to do it in a way that shows understanding and consistency. When you look at the grammars, most grammars will have at some point, usually if they're Western based, a list of abbreviations will come at the beginning of the grammar. So you can consult it all the time when you read it. More Eastern European grammars type, that list will be at the end, or will not exist at all. So you have to figure it out as you go, but it's possible. So some grammars are easier to read than others, but the fact that something is hard to read doesn't mean that you shouldn't. Whatever you do in that morphomatic translation, you need to be able to explain why you did it the way you did. So the basic thing is you give what each morpheme means. That means that you know what is a lexical morpheme, what is a grammatical morpheme. I will see those examples again when I discuss the dative, but it's on purpose. I don't overflow you with data here. Oops. Okay, so see in NIF, that is a polysynthetic language par excellence. So we'll have the word taboos, and then the plural, and then what is called in the grammar as dative accusative. And then the plus sign indicates an incorporated noun. So the word for noun, for river, and then incorporated with the root to be something, and then a causative, and then convert narrative, and three singular. For glossing, there are no and then you continue this way. If you don't get a whole sentence in one line, you continue on the next line. with Leipzig glossing rules. And there you find guidelines for most what I said here. They have also a basic set of abbreviations. When you abbreviate stuff, I recommend that you check if there is already an abbreviation for a particular grammatical morpheme in Leipzig instead of inventing your own. Because this way your examples become readable and easier to understand. And then if it's not in Leipzig, because Leipzig doesn't claim that they have it all, they just suggest a set of principles, how you gloss, and a set of abbreviations that are commonly used. And from there, you are on your own. Now, here, I mean, those are, it's Ljuba and Veselinova who wrote the grammar of D. And you can, I mean, they have their own conventions. And another thing I highly recommend is do not correct whatever, if it's cited this way in the grammar, cite it as the source cites it. You can get consistent later on. So what they call it in Leipzig, it is recommended that if something is, if a morpheme has two meanings, that you choose whatever meaning is appropriate for the context. But if the author cited with dative and accusative with a slash, cite it this way. Okay. Then there will be morphemes that are inflectional, so there will be two meanings attached to them. I think I had, did I have like something on the previous slide? Yeah, okay. So the Russian dative is dative, singular, and masculine, right? And masculine. So there should have been a dot M here for masculine. These are all three separate grammatical meanings, but they're incorporated in one and the same form. And according to Leipzig conventions, there is a dot that separates them. So I forgot to write the M here. But keep this in mind. Dot separates separate meanings except for when it's a person. Person, first, second, third is indicated by digits, and between a digit and the singular, if a number follows, singular, plural, dual, there is no dot. Publishers follow the Leipzig glossing rules. It's good because they have become a convention. They're very competent linguists who suggested them. So it's good if they're followed as much as possible, and they're not really. They make sense. So these are conventions, and follow convention just like you follow conventional spelling. But do you get an idea of how you gloss? Okay, sort of. Should we do some glossing exercises for next time? That people can turn in some glossed examples. Yeah. If you can take the sentences from the handout, translate them into Turkish, and gloss them, and then pick a language of your choice, preferably not English, and translate the gloss. Is that?
All gloss, not in Turkish. Oh, not in English.
You can do it in, well, Turkish, I'll have a hard time reading it, but I can use Google to translate, and I know what they mean.
I can
so
help.
Yeah, so that it's fine with Turkish, and that way you can help me. So, but just so because me explaining this, I can spend one hour on this, but unless you actually do it, it's not. And if you go to the Leipzig glossing rules site, I don't think it will be, you will get it. It's not as hard as it sounds. It can be, it depends on how you look at this. I mean, it can be a bit boring if you're in a hurry, but it's part of your comparative work. So you need to get the gist of this. How am I doing in terms of time? Okay, I will go through functional domain typology and through comparative concepts, and then we can take a break. Okay. And then we'll go over to selecting languages for study. So suppose we know how to gloss, we know what our resources are. We need to decide what to study. In typology, we usually say that we go to a functional domain, and a functional domain could be pretty much anything that can be associated with some content, semantic or pragmatic, usually both, and it has some ways that encode it in language. That means it is associated with some structural features, but the structural features are really no basis for comparison because languages are different. So we don't start from structure, we start from content. Negation is a functional domain, and negation, I'll be speaking about negation later on, but negation can be split into negation of verbs, negation of states, negation of existence. They're all subdomains of the domain of negation, and they all can be studied in their own right. Tense is another functional domain, and again, tense can be split into tenses referring to the present, tenses referring to the past, tenses referring to the past of yesterday, so tenses with remoteness distinctions or tenses with no remoteness distinctions, and tenses with some evidential distinctions, if you saw it or not, if you believe in it or not, if you don't. So tense will go into the domain of modality as well, or tense will go into the domain of aspect. How long does an action take? How is it? Possession is another big domain, and I'm not listing up all kinds of functional domains, but I'm listing examples, and examples that have been studied extensively. You'll find a huge amount of literature on these things. So in possession, it is hard to even define what possession is. What does it mean to have something? Does it mean that something is closed by you? Or does it mean that something has been assigned to you by someone else? Does it mean that it's something you bought? Is it something physical or is it something abstract? Well, all of this goes into defining what possession is. Comparison, this is causation, like if you did something to someone, and this goes into the notion of transitivity. And then comparison, I'm going to be using comparison. Leon Stassen is another huge name in typology, big monumental works. His first one was in comparison, the other one is in transitive predication. He likes to work with huge amount of languages and do extensive studies on this very well delimited functional domain. So for next time we'll be doing comparison, and like apart from glossing sentences, the sentences from this time, I would ask you to think about comparison in Turkish, how you say he's taller than me, and things like that. Now, if we come to what I started with American structuralism, that languages differ from each other with no limit and in unpredictable ways. This was in the 20s, and then came Chomsky and in the 50s and rejected it with great passion. And people believed in universal grammar. We are all born with this capacity that is specific for language learning and language production, and that's our innate universal grammar. This is something that is almost biologically coded, genetically coded according to Chomsky, which has great repercussions when we compare languages, because then we think that we have a category of past tense that is universal, and then the Turkish past tense instantiates that category in some way, and the Bulgarian past tense instantiates it in some other way, and the past tense of Chichevo, which is a Bantu language, instantiates it in some third way. Well, people who do serious documentary work do not agree with universal grammar. A lot of things in universal grammar, if you look at languages seriously, do not confirm that they're innate categories. So people like me don't believe that we are born with a specific gene for language learning. In typology, we believe that language is developed as a cognitive capacity, just like our capacity for hearing music and understanding music, and our way of life leads us to communicate, and languages, the development of languages, one consequence of that. For instance,
Excuse me, Professor Ljuba,
yeah,
can I ask a question?
sure.
About that discussion, Chomsky's way of defining it, and you or people like you who do not believe that human beings are not born with genes, specific genes for innate,
yeah.
Isn't it rather a discussion point for biology, or how do you combine it with your own
There are
studies?
people, there are people among us. I don't go to conferences in biology, but some of my colleagues do.
Well, is it a specific field which combines biological studies with linguistic studies?
Has been there are people who try to do it, and they call themselves evolutionary linguists.
Right.
They're not. It hasn't kicked off as a school in a very strong way, but in a way it is. It's a completely justified question. Yeah, since we don't know anything about biology or evolution, but some people do know a lot about evolution. We shouldn't be even discussing that. But see, neither does Chomsky. Chomsky doesn't know much about evolution, and that universal UG, universal grammar, was based very much on English and formal models. They do have their merit in very many ways. I'm not denying any kind of formal thinking in linguistics. What I thought was very refreshing when I understood that typology existed, and I looked at typology instead of drawing trees with a seed out here and then I move something in a tree structure, was that they presuppose there are categories that are predetermined for all languages. If you look at languages in a serious way, you see that this is impossible, that not all languages have verbs in the sense that they are defined here, that there is no such thing as a definite article in all languages. Those are things that are relevant for some languages, completely irrelevant for others. So in this sense, universal grammar as such does not exist. And if there is a gene or not, there is a lot of psycholinguistic studies and a lot of evolutionary studies that point to evidence that you can't develop language if you're not in the right setting. So if that gene is not stimulated.
So what we can understand is that there certainly is no common gene for all human beings, for all types of human beings, wherever they are living, geographically or so. That would meet everyone in one linguistic, in one language type. But can we say that there certainly is an instinct, at least, in human beings to speak?
There is, I mean, I'll say there is a communicative need to speak. You live in a situation.
Or to formulate a
you
language?
have to communicate. So you start by communication, and you have to, you hunt, you have to like distribute whatever game you got, and then maybe chop it and stuff. So you need language for that. So there is, I mean, I would say I don't know about instinct. This is again like very without language instinct. But I would talk about necessity. Human beings rarely live in isolation. Living in a community presupposes that you talk. Otherwise, you can't make up a life. So.
Good, thank you.
Vital. So we have like this jump. In a way, it's a very. I mean, turning your thinking around in 180 degrees from the 20s and American structuralism. I'm citing here a source that discusses American structuralism, but American structuralism was in the 20s. Chomsky is in the 50s. With innate universal grammar, and then his whole Chomsky school that's going on until today with the minimalist program that came in the 90s. People, the Greenbergian students have said that no, we can compare language. There is a basis for comparison, and languages are different. But a lot of people today, and the thinking goes back to American structuralism, that when we compare languages, we need to be sure that we compare like with like. And then languages are very different, so the dative in Turkish is not the same as the dative in Russian. We shouldn't put them, just because that those two are called dative, we should not put them in the same basket. That's when I cite these people, Lazar, Dreyer, Croft, Haspelmath, this is what they're saying. What they're also saying is that there is no innate category dative that Turkish or Russian instantiate. Those two are similar things, but they do different things in their respective languages. So the take nowadays is that you should look at each language on its own right. When you describe language, you should describe it as a system, an independent system of its own, but you should have tool or several tools to compare languages. And what I'm referring to here is Haspelmath's work from mostly 2010. It's a language, it's a article in language that's called comparative concepts. So what it comes down to is that you really make sure that you don't compare apples and tomatoes, but you compare apples with apples. And here, when I was like writing this lecture, I was thinking about breakfast. So this is one type of breakfast, okay? When you look at a salad, at least in my world, I don't think of a salad as a meal. Both as a breakfast meal. Okay, I don't eat salad for breakfast. I can eat strawberries for breakfast, no problem. And breakfast. But those two are different types of meals. They have different functions. So don't compare, to me, salad is a lunch or a supper. So don't compare breakfast with supper. Compare breakfast with another breakfast. That's, I mean, it's not seen very well on the picture, but that's your typical American breakfast, like eggs and hash browns and toast. And so if you want to get stuffed, you can go for that breakfast. If you want to be healthy, go for like the fruity breakfast. But they're both breakfasts. So this is what comparative concepts are about. Compare things in language that have the same function. So I'm going to go over to the dative as a cross-linguistic phenomenon, but what we have to bear in mind is that function is important and not structural features, and I've said this already. So structural definitions as universal categories cannot be expected to exist. I said this about function. So Greenberg defined his categories as subject, object, and verb semantically. So his subjects were agents, and objects were patients, and verbs were actions. Stassen gave the semantic definitions for his comparative domain. Hasselmatt compared indefinite pronouns, again, on a functional basis with some structural features. So the comparative concept here that we're going to look at, I said this already. Okay. I said this already in a different way. Right? We describe language in its own right, and for that we have descriptive categories. They're language specific, and they have to be relevant for the language you're describing. But the tools that we need as comparativists are comparative concepts, and they have to be, all we need to do is be consistent with them. And they cannot be right or wrong, but they need to be relevant for whatever we're describing. So if we go to the dative case, the first thing we say, a case is a morphological category. So we say here that it has to be bound. It cannot be anything else. It codes the recipient argument of a physical transfer verb. So such verbs are give, lend, sell, hand in English. And it is coded differently from the theme argument. So what we have said here is that we look at physical transfer verbs. They have at least 3 arguments, and we look at how the marking looks like on 2 of them, the recipient and the theme, whoever is doing the giving. And it has to be bound. So there are several key things that we look at: morphology, physical transfer verbs, 2 kinds of arguments, and we compare the coding of the recipient from the coding of the theme. That is our comparative concept. When we, later on, now here I'm going to define the dative as something that, say, we look at in several languages. Later on I'm going to be talking about semantic maps, and then we're going to see when we identify something as a dative, what else does it do in its own language. So we go back to the Russian example, and we have a verb to give, and something that is being given, the theme, and then the recipient. The thing that is being given is coded by U, which is the accusative, and there is a different kind of ending on the recipient, so that satisfies, they're both bound suffixes. So that satisfies our definition. So we take it that Russian has that dative that we look at. Then we look at Finnish. It's not called dative, but the theme is in genitive and the recipient is in allative. But the important thing is that we have a physical transfer verb that takes at least 2 arguments. The agent can be skipped here. And the two arguments are coded differently. It doesn't matter that it's called allative here, it still has the function of the dative. So we take that. If we go to NIF, which is a language isolate from the Far East, we have something that is called dative accusative. But what we look at, the verb is not a physical transfer verb, it's a causative verb. And the argument here is not a recipient, but it's a patient. So even if it's called dative, it doesn't count as a dative. Right. So that doesn't count in NIF. But there is another, if we continue to, you have to go through the entire source. When you start, it's great fun. When you're at the end of your project and you don't have time, you just want to go to the page where it says dative. Don't do that. Just have, if you are at a stage at some point when you have to go through a bunch of languages and you don't have time, do few languages, but do them well. Don't just go to whatever says dative. So there is another category called dative, and it's called dative additive in NIF. And what it does is, we have a physical transfer verb. You take your skis, to bring skis to somebody. And there is a recipient. Oh, that's the older brother too. Okay. There is a recipient, the ski is incorporated, so the incorporation means closed object. That is coded in a different way than the recipient, and even though it's an additive, it still counts as a dative, because with the dative we look at the recipient coding. So among the two datives in NIF, we can only take the one that is expressed here by TOBB, and it goes with physical transfer verbs. So in our comparative concepts, we have outlined several features. We need to look for these features in all the languages that we investigate. I have to say that when comparative concepts are rarely correct from the beginning. You do define a concept, you work through 10 languages, and you see that you should have added something. So it's a process of you refine it, but you do have a core. That means you've done your reading on the dative, or in my case, negative existence, and you are informed when you design your concept. But you don't know your language material. This is why you're doing the investigation in the first place. So in practice, you start with one definition, you go through 10 languages, you need to go back, refine it, and then go on with your further set of languages. You should not, if you keep refining it and changing it until the end, then it was not a good concept in the first place, because somewhere in the middle you stop changing. But you should be open to change, and I have to say, once you change, you have to go back and redo the first 10 languages in the first place, so they're all consistent. And this will apply to designing semantic maps as well. But in this lecture, I want you to understand that comparative concepts are your tool for comparison, and you design them so that you can do a sensible comparison of languages across the world. They're not anything that is psychologically relevant for these languages. And for the languages that you look at,